Greetings. This is the man who pretends to be Charles Darwin, but today I'm speaking to you as Stan Rice, the author of the book Scientifically Thinking: How to Liberate Your Mind, Solve the World's Problems, and Embrace the Beauty of Science. And I want to tell you about chapter 6 of this book, which is Just Measure It. You would think it would be so easy to measure things. How could that possibly be difficult? Well, one difficulty is that you cannot use human senses as a way of measuring the phenomena of nature. And I'm going to give you an example. We're in a classroom, and the lights are on nice and bright. You can read a book. It's what would be considered a well-lit room. And yet, the light intensity around here is about 7. Is that right, Riley?
Mm-hmm.
Introduce yourself. Hi. Okay, so it's about 7. The units are micromoles of photons per square meter per second. And so what this device does, it's an objective measurement of the amount of light, because the photons are transduced into electricity and it's measured on the display. So this is an objective measurement of light. Now we're going to go outside and try it again. Now as we go outside, we see that in fact it is brighter. But how much brighter is it outside than inside? Especially when I come out into the light, this sunlight. Of course, we think maybe it's 10 times brighter or 50 times brighter. And yet, what I see here is it's reading about 700. Is that about right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's reading about 700, and that depends on the angle at which I hold this. But 700 seems to be a good measurement. So out here in the sunlight, it is 100 times brighter than it is in the well-lit room inside. Now, what this tells us is that it doesn't look 100 times brighter, but it is 100 times brighter. Human senses cannot be used as measuring devices because the human eye, for instance, it closes down. It constricts the pupil when we go outside, and also the brain itself is more sensitive to light signals that come from the shade than it is to things that come from full sunlight. And the reason is because the eyes of the brain evolved to provide useful information, not necessarily accurate information. It was useful because our evolutionary ancestors, the ones that survived like children, the ones who had evolutionary fitness, were the ones that could see the crepuscular dangers in the shade. And so the brain does in fact give you useful information, but it does not give you unbiased and accurate information. And this is true in many other areas of science, even something as basic as making measurements. We don't just eyeball the length, we measure it with rulers. We don't just guess what the temperature is, stick our finger in, oh, it's hot. That can be dangerous, of course, but we measure it with thermometers so we get an accurate reading. Also, we do all kinds of other measurements using equipment rather than just kind of making a guess at the way it feels. And that's important even at that very first step of science. What do you measure? How do you measure it? Is complicated and something that requires our attention as scientists. This is the man who pretends to be Charles Darwin, telling you